And at that board meeting, there was actually some public comment to include some additional parcels to the east of the project area. So in February, you approved a resolution authorizing us to look at amended project area boundaries and to conduct further investigation and update the project area plan, which we've done for you, provided in your packet. So you have the updated project area plan, a resolution authorizing adoption of the project area plan by the RDA, and city ordinance that would approve the project area plan on the city side, and also resolutions authorizing us to execute a new interlocal agreement. And essentially what all of these documents would do, it would amend and replace the project area plan and the agreements that have already been executed. So the risk with that, with the current legislative decisions, is that project areas that have been executed and all the agreements executed prior to March 1st, 2018 remain intact under the current legislation, but any new project area is at risk of the tax increment being kind of reallocated. I was trying to find the right word, to the Inland Port Authority, the new board that's being created. So with that being said, there's some risk of moving forward with adopting and replacing the project area as we've presented in the packet today.
So can you just quickly for this board remind us what the tax increment can be? Like what are the limits to the tax increment, considering the agreement that we had in place before March 1st? And after the bill, it looks like 100% of our tax increment is on the line potentially. So adjusting the boundary puts all of our agreements in limbo, because we don't know exactly if we'll be able to uphold the language in those agreements, correct?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that right now the project area plan is created. We have entered into the interlocal between the Redevelopment Agency and Salt Lake City. We have not entered into any interlocal agreements with any other taxing entities. So what we are talking about right now being grandfathered is simply the city's portion of tax increment for that project area. And so that is all that we were able to, quote unquote, protect as part of that grandfathering language. So if we were to amend this project area, there's a possibility that that could be interpreted as essentially resetting that clock of when the project area plan was agreed to and approved, and the interlocal between the agency and the city, and therefore we would potentially lose the opportunity to collect that increment.
So we're considering adjacent properties here, right? So is there no way that we can expand without changing the date?
There is. There's no way to necessarily expand and amend the existing project area, but at the advice or direction of the board, if you wanted us to look at those additional properties and setting those up as a separate new project area, that would be an option. However, any new project areas are still subject to the Inland Port Authority and their power to collect increments. So whatever project area you create, whatever interlocal agreement you enter into with a taxing entity, and whatever reimbursement you pledge with any developers from this point forward is subject to that Port Authority collecting that increment instead.
Okay. Board members, questions?
Sure.
Yes. We'll start with Board Member Mendenhall, because I noticed her first,
Yep,
and then we'll go
fine.
to you, Board Member Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have we had that discussion with Boyer and Romney?
We have. We have reached out to Boyer and Romney, the property owners. We have indicated what the issue is in terms of amending the project area and how we feel that that would be viewed as a new project area and would put that agreement in jeopardy. They have understood our concerns. They are obviously sensitive to the position we are in. They are disappointed because they wanted to amend the project area. And they have indicated a willingness to continue to work with us in terms of trying to either find another solution and or expressing their concerns to the other entities in terms of the state and the Inland Port Authority of what position this has now put them in.
Mr. Chair, if I may, it seems like there is the potential for greater clarity on SB 234 in the time after a special session takes place. And I would, my thoughts are around allocating staff resources prior to that clarity to develop a potentially additional CRA over those properties when that may all be shifted by the May special session that we're hearing about. So if our property owners are willing to wait with us for that clarity until May, I think I would rather not direct staff to spend much time when we really don't know quite what we're dealing with just yet. And I think for the property owner's sake, they would benefit from the same clarity that we seek to gain in that special session. Thanks.
Thank you. Board Member Luke?
2 questions. First off, what's the administration's recommendation on how to proceed?
The administration, we're still looking as part of what our options are for the Northwest Quadrant strategy overall. I think they would probably share the same concerns of to what level we want to dedicate staff resources. I think generally speaking, they feel that there is benefit in continuing to move forward on the city's behalf of putting the pieces in place for...
Danny, is your mic on?
Is it on now?
That's better.
Is that better?
Thank
Sorry.
you.
And there's the interest in...
Maybe bend it up just a little.
Yeah.
But there you go.
In the city continuing to show that it is willing to work within the Northwest Quadrant and be that partner. But I think there are also concerns of to what extent we would be doing work and have that replaced by any actions of the Inland Port Authority.
Okay. Thank you. So I guess I just had one question and one comment. I agree with Board Member Mendenhall. I'm going to go a little bit further. I do think that, with the legislation, the actions that we've already taken to create the CRA on the northwest side, since that is not impacted directly, well, not impacted as much, not directly, by the legislation. I think that ought to be the only area at this point that we focus staff resources or time or any city resources until, if and when there is additional clarity on 234. I think that, in my opinion, is still questionable as to the reality of what ends up happening. And so I am, while I am disappointed that we can't move forward the way that I think would make sense, I'm not willing to spin wheels either. And I do think that we can, there are still things that we can and should continue working with the property owners within the current CRA boundaries. And that's where I would like to see, as a board member, where I would like to see RDA staff resources and city resources spent from here on out until we have additional clarity. And once we get to that point, we can have this discussion again. But until that time, talking about anything outside of the existing boundaries is pointless.
Board members?
Yeah, I would like to, I feel like this is probably going to be something that might be a recurring issue of how do we move forward until we have clarification on what's going to happen, or if something's going to happen in May with the special session. I think I would like to see, is there a way that we could do a letter to the bodies that would appoint potential board members to the inland port to say, to sort of notify them that this is a problem that we have under the existing law. We would like to include these companies. We would like to move forward, and then maybe just asking for feedback from them about explaining the problem that's been created by SB 234 with this particular issue, and seeking feedback on how they would like us to move forward, because I think it's important that we do continue to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we show that we want to collaborate to move forward and that we want to have a collaborative exchange, but also, respectfully pointing out that this is preventing us from moving forward.
If I could jump in there as well. I agree, Board Member Wharton, that we do need to be moving forward and communicating to all parties involved that we want to participate. Obviously, this bill has created some confusion and a little bit of issues with clarity on how we move forward and where our authority actually lies and what would be an appropriate agreement for us to enter into with these private property owners. And I agree with you as well, Board Member Mendenhall, about concern with staff time, you know, because we've been promised by the governor and certain legislators that they would pick this issue up, SB 234, and clean it up in a special session. I will say going through this exercise has been good in one sense because it's helped us understand some of the issues that have been presented in the bill. And I think that there will be other issues as well that we need to get some clarity on so that we can effectively lobby on behalf of ourselves for the cleanup bill. So let's definitely be taking notes on issues as they come up. As staff, RDA staff, can you point to any additional concerns or issues with other project areas or potential agreements that you may want to bring up at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the issue that you're talking about right now with creating a separate project area is the same issue we're somewhat find ourselves in with the Stadler single property CRA that is on your agenda today to set the date and time. That one is a little bit different because we have already invested the staff time and resources to study that, to draft the plan and do the cost-benefit analysis. And we are simply at the point where we're in that notification process of accepting public comment on the plan before we bring that back to you in April for approval. So with that one, you have the same options of whether you want to do nothing or whether you want to proceed with approving that plan and the interlocal agreement between the agency and the city, as well as a reimbursement agreement with the developer. Or you even have the option of that one is you could approve the plan, enter into the interlocal agreement with the agency and the city, and then simply wait to enter into the reimbursement agreement with the developer. So you would set up all the pieces in terms of the legal and statutory requirements for creating the plan and the interlocal, and you would wait until you potentially receive some clarity or have the interim session and get some clarity on SB 234 before you actually just enter into the agreement with the developer. And that would be the agreement that actually pledges the tax increment to the developer.
Have you had dialogue with Stadler Rail about this potential concern?
We've had initial dialogue with Stadler as part of our finance committee meeting, wherein we expressed the concerns that we just outlined in terms of what the potential is that we could create a plan, we could enter into the interlocal and reimbursement agreement, and then the Inland Port Authority could come in and obviously take over any increment that we allocate. And so the conversations with them have been simply making them aware that at this point, whatever we do as an agency is subject to the new SB 234 language, and that we can't necessarily guarantee that that won't happen. And as part of that, we're looking at what our options are of what to do.
Great. Board Member Luke.
Again, with as with the other CRA, I don't support us moving forward on the Stadler piece either. I think we need to be, I would encourage staff to have a very direct discussion with Stadler and let them know that, we are still interested and committed to moving forward, but we can do whatever we want at this point, and it does not matter until we know what the board is going to, what decisions the Port Authority is going to do, and whether, any potential changes to the legislation come to fruition. I think, expecting that to happen, I would argue against that. I think we need to look at the legislation that we currently have and operate as if that is going to be the legislation. If we can get it changed at some point, fantastic. Then we can revisit it. But again, I would rather focus all efforts on the area that we can actually do something with, which is the area, the existing CRA. And while it is unfortunate that we're in the position we're in, that's the position we're in. And Stadler needs to understand that this isn't, us not wanting to move forward with them or us not agreeing with them, but at this point, anything we do is a waste of time until we know what happens. Because if we work towards something where we hope is going to happen, that it just may not. So I would rather have that discussion once we have clarity, if we get clarity. But until then, let's focus on the area that we have. The landfill issue has now been resolved. I think we have property owners who have been working with us throughout this process and in good faith. And I think we owe it to them to be spending time on moving forward with the plan that we see fit. And that does match what the state's intention is. This idea that the legislation, that if you don't support the legislation, you don't support the inland port, is nonsense. The city has been working on the inland port. We've been working on this concept for years. We're making progress. We have, made good faith efforts with the property owners. I think we owe it to them to focus our efforts on the area until we have until we have some clarity, and then we can have a direction on expanding any services that we may be able to do.
Thank you, Board Member Luke. We're going to stay over here and go with Board Member Rogers, and then Board Member Mendenhall, and then Wharton.
Hi, Board. Katie Lewis. Thank you for the question, Board Member Rogers. To the extent that the city and RDA decided to pursue project area creation, interlocal agreements, and tax increment reimbursements with various property owners in the area that's now the Port Authority jurisdictional land, those contracts would all clearly say that they're subject to the senior right of the Port Authority to take the increment, and then that becomes a business decision for the developer of whether that's something that they want to rely on as they begin doing their developments. But it's the only contractual language that we could get comfortable with because of SB 234's sort of senior priority on the increment.
Board Member Mendenhall, please.
I wanted to reiterate my desire that Chris brought up for us to put together a letter. And I could foresee, as he said, that this is one that we send multiple times as we feel opportunities are being delayed in the Northwest Quadrant because of the ambiguity and the conflict in the language of SB 234. I want us to be able to work in a transparent manner with those state partners and show that we want to continue in this dialogue as they consider the substance of the special session. I want us to highlight the ambiguities and the conflict that arise through this unique opportunity, that arise through Stadler's unique opportunity, and whatever other ones come along before the special session happens, and that we articulate that these opportunities are being delayed by the ambiguity and the conflicts in this bill, that the city has a process in place and has partnerships at the ready to begin development immediately. So it's a letter I see us reusing, but reorienting maybe portions of it to each unique circumstance. And I think that our public wants to see that we are omnipresent in our care and our work to develop the Northwest Quadrant and to be a transparent partner and to be very sharp on the details of what SB 234 does. I think it's important for all of those relationships with the private property owners, the state, and with our public.
Thank you, Board Member Mendenhall.
But
Chris-
on top of that letter, I think it's important that we state because of SB 234 and not say the state did this. I mean, I know you'll formulate it that way, but I'm just worried that the more and more that we continue to harp and picket heels and do finger pointing, I think we just lay it out. We cannot move forward because of XYZ because of this.
That was my intention. Thank you.
Did you want to respond?
I wanted to add something that I just thought of with relation to Stadler. And on behalf of staff, I'd probably ask that we at least keep and still set the date and time for a hearing and push this to the April meeting. And the reason for that is it's our understanding, and I would probably like the opportunity to verify this before we do anything. It's our understanding that as part of the purchase contract between Stadler and PRI for acquiring the property, one of the conditions for them actually closing on the land is securing an RDA project area. And so I think it might be helpful to at least keep that in mind and give us the opportunity to reach out to them and see if that is in fact a condition of their property acquisition, number one. Number two, it leaves our options open as an agency to at least come back in a few weeks, be able to have that discussion again and see if there's any benefit in at least proceeding with setting up the project area for them to keep their options open in terms of acquiring the property. They are out doing site work on it, and so I think it might be fair to them to at least preserve that option and see if we can report back to that.
So just for some clarity, we could move forward with creation of the CRA without actually proceeding with the interlocal with our taxing entities. Is that correct? So if we were to set it up, that would allow them to move forward with their financing and closure of the property itself?
Yes, you have a few opportunities in terms of you could create the project area, and the interlocal agreement, and you can do the project area, the interlocal, and the reimbursement, or at any time you could just stop and say, this is as far as we are willing to go as a city. You could still serve the letters and indicate that this is a concern for us to proceed, but we could do some point of that at least keeps the options available for Stadler.
All right, we're going to hold this conversation on Stadler and setting the date until we get to it on our agenda. We're going to go over to Board Member Wharton.
I just wanted to hear your feedback on sending these letters and reiterate that I foresee this, as I said at the beginning, happening on a number of issues, and trying to document each one and being very specific in why we can't move forward, what provisions of SB 234 make it impossible or ambiguous as to how we move forward. And I would like to see that each instance separated out and sent to all of those interested parties.
Okay.
Great. Anybody else? Board Member Johnston, do you have any thoughts? Okay. All right. So we do have a motion sheet here, and I would like to reiterate what I'm hearing from my colleagues here, and that is that we want to take every opportunity to communicate back to the legislature and the governor's office whenever we see a conflict that presents itself due to SB 234 and our continuation of conducting business that's in the pipeline. And so we want to definitely send one with regard to the boundary adjustment, potentially one for Stadler Rail specifically, and just articulate that this bill has created an enormous amount of uncertainty for us.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Can I clarify on that piece?
Yes.
I think the statement was made about the letter to send it to the stakeholders identified in the legislation, which would include a lot of other people outside of the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. Is that the indication, or is this for the legislature and the governor?
What are your thoughts, board?
My original suggestion was to send it to each of the entities that would be appointing the board,
I see.
so that they would see and be able to consider the issues that are going to be coming before that board, since we don't have a board to send it to.
Okay.
So that would include West Valley, Magna,
The county,
county.
yeah.
that are.
I agree with that.
Great. So, by all means, Board Member Fowler, please.
Just to add to that, I also think it should go to the stakeholders, and so that the business owners, the property owners, understand that we are trying to move forward, and that these are the issues that we've run into. So I think everybody that is involved, all of the stakeholders, need to have that piece of letter and our thoughts on that, so that we are making sure they understand that we're trying, we're really trying, right? And so that's what I would suggest as well.
We've been joined by the mayor. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining us.
I have a question. Are you requesting that the letter be sent by me, the administration like Laura Fritz, or you as a board?
I imagine it could come from all of us or one entity or the other, but this is a board request, so at the very minimum, I imagine this is coming from the board of directors of the RDA. Is that correct?
Yes, that was my thought,
Okay.
because we would
Yep.
discuss and negotiate amongst ourselves the willingness to expand the boundaries.
And,
or
Right.
As this
Okay.
comes about, I imagine, we would potentially need information from the administration and support at
Right.
some level. So you may be hearing from us more on this, but I suppose in the dialogue of the public forum, we wanted to agree on a pathway forward for communication as a board.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I do have a question for the mayor. Do you have an opinion on the action?
No, I just want to make sure that my team is clear, and that as we move forward, there'll be requests that I will have as well. And so just wanted to make sure they understood what you were asking of them. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on this board before I make my final comments? Okay, so we do have a request for action in front of us today. You know, what I'm gathering is that we probably want to be mindful of how we move forward, considering that changing the CRA boundary puts the existing CRA in total jeopardy, based on the language that as we interpret it in SB 234. And we want to make sure that we're, you know, conducting ourselves in the business world in good faith with our partners. And if we cannot guarantee that we will be able to hold up our end of a bargain, it's probably not good business for us to move forward with any new contracts or CRAs that fall within the inland port boundary or jurisdiction. So that being said, I will turn to my colleagues for a potential motion,
I'll give you one.
please.
I move that the RDA board not approve the expansion of the boundaries of the existing Northwest Quadrant project area, with the understanding that SB 234 has created ambiguity in our ability to fulfill our components of that agreement.
I have a motion by Board Member Mendenhall and a second by Board Member Luke. Discussion on this? Board Member Fowler?
I'm in favor of this motion, but I would like to be able to come back and keep it on another agenda or another RDA meeting agenda. So I guess it would almost be a friendly amendment to that we wouldn't approve it, but we'd put it back onto an RDA agenda so that we can continue the discussion around what we're going to do with this.
You mean after clarity is potentially received in a special session, or before that?
I think it makes the most sense after, to see what happens in the special session, and so long as the RDA staff continues and we as staff continue, or as a board, continue to discuss and be in contact with property owners so that they understand why and what we're doing, then I think it would make sense to put it on after the potential interim session.
I think that's a really important point, Board Member Fowler, because I agree that we don't want to send any indication that we are done with this. And so I would actually look for maybe a motion from you, a substitute motion, or somebody from a board member here about tabling this until we have further information. That way we could pick it up at a later date.
Yeah, I'll change my motion that we table this consideration until after the special session is convened and changes are made to SB 234.
If you would change your motion to tabling it until any changes to the bill are done. So I wouldn't specify a special session or regular session, just any legal changes to the bill, then I
Are
still support it.
completed.
Yeah.
Okay, then we table it until legal changes to SB 234 are concluded.
Is there any discussion on this motion? Okay, I'm just going to roll call. Board Member Johnston?
Yes.
Wharton? Yes. Mendenhall?
Yes.
Fowler?
Yes.
Rogers?
Yes.
Luke?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well, so that carries. We have tabled this to a future board meeting. Now, staff, was that an action for both item 2 and 3, or do we need to move on to item 3? To me, they're so interlinked. So, all right, on to item 4 today. NeighborWorks loan extension, which is, we have Danny Waltz and Jill Wilkerson-Smith, RDA project manager at the table.
I will let Jill tee this one up. And
Okay. Thank you very much. Today, we are here to discuss request from NeighborWorks for a 6-month loan extension on the Marmalade Courtyard project. I should note this is a second loan extension request that they have made. They made their first request a year ago through an administrative process, which is in our loan policy. They are building 30 townhomes on 771 North, 300 West. The note is $475,000 with a 0% interest rate. This was approved by the RDA board in December of 2013. I should note that this request was issued by NeighborWorks shortly before the loan went into default, so we have issued a default letter to NeighborWorks, so they are on notice that it is in default. We met with the Finance Committee back in January, middle of January, and they recommend approval of the extension subject to the primary loan being paid off of the title and off title, which it has been. And also that we do not grant any other loan extensions. If the board approves this loan extension, this loan will be due and payable on June 20th of this year. And so what we're asking today is your consideration of this loan request. I should note that Al Faratian and David Galvan, and David Galvan from NeighborWorks are here in the audience if you have any questions about the project. Thank you.
Do you have anything to add, Danny?
No, other than they are under construction. They have completed 3 of the units essentially, and so we're essentially just waiting for those to sell and start the repayment process, and we're confident that that will happen prior to the deadline.
Great. Board members? Questions, comments? Board Member Rogers?
How many of the units have pre-sold? Have they sold pre-sold any units yet?
No, they haven't pre-sold any, but they have 3 that are essentially completed. Dave, is that correct that you haven't? 6 now?
Great.
Do you need to repeat that back in the mic for the official record?
I'll just reiterate that they have completed 6 of the units. 1 of them is in negotiation right now, and so.
Great. Anything else, board members? Board Member Johnston?
As I understand it, selling 2 of these essentially will pay this off in June. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And what's the going price for these we're looking at this point? 350?
Between 340 and 360,000.
Okay. I'm being careful how to phrase this. Having a 0% interest loan in an area that's already booming, and now the prices are pretty high for a townhome, does this make sense for us going forward as a policy?
Which part, the 0%
0%
loan or
interest,
just
yeah.
providing financing in general?
No, the 0% interest loans.
As part of our loan program, we do charge an interest rate that is set off the Treasury rate and 300 basis points over and above, and it's only if they accomplish some of the public benefits that they get a reduction of that interest rate. And so to answer your question, I think from a policy standpoint, it makes sense to continue with that because that's the incentive and motivation for them to do components of the project that we would like to see.
For the affordability particularly, you're thinking?
And the ownership, I should add, is another component that we have advocated for in West Capitol Hill to have more ownership product. As well as there are 2 older buildings on 300 West that we have asked NeighborWorks to renovate and convert into condominium units, which was the RDA incentive for getting the reduction in the loan interest rate.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? All right, our formal business on this is to consider adopting a resolution extending the maturity date. Do we have any thoughts on that? Any motion?
I'll move for approval.
I second.
Can
Okay.
I make a request
By all
to your
means.
a friendly amendment that we do so with the conditions that the RDA loan committee articulated? There's 2. One being that the $850,000 loan in first position from Morgan Stanley be paid in full, reconveyed, and removed from the title, and 2, that the RDA not provide any subsequent loan extensions beyond June 20th of 2018. And it's in my notes that the staff confirmed the first condition was met already.
Yes.
So
Correct.
should I remove that and just do the second condition?
Sure.
Let the RDA not provide any subsequent loan extensions beyond June 20th of 2018.
Yeah, I'll accept that.
Okay, I have a motion by Board Member Rogers with a substitute motion or a friendly amendment from Board Member Mendenhall.
But just for clarification, I think, Aaron, we need to differentiate between the two buildings that are still needing to be renovated along 300 West, because they have not started those.
There's two phases to
Separate
this.
loans.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're talking about just the loan for the current townhomes.
And that's all that we're considering the extension on anyway.
That's correct.
And I think that it needs to be pointed out that I drive by these units every single day on my way to work, and NeighborWorks has gone from siding it with actual metal siding to going to stucco because the metal wasn't holding up. It didn't look good. So I want to commend NeighborWorks for seeing a problem that they had, that they could have finished the project the way it was, but they saw the project and they're actually doing a better job than what it was initially looking at.
Great.
So you're endorsing stucco here?
I'm not, but I'm telling you, it looks so much better than it did. I mean, just the quality of the finished material is a lot better.
Okay, I have a motion by Board Member Rogers, second by Board Member Johnston, friendly amendment by Board Member Mendenhall that we will not extend this loan beyond June 20th of 2018. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, that motion carries. And it has been brought to my attention that Board Member Wharton would like for us to go back to item number 3, the interlocal agreement for the Northwest Quadrant Area Plan. And I'm going to toss it over to Board Member Wharton.
Hi, just really quick. I just wanted to add, because I thought we were going to be discussing 3 separately, that I would like to ask if Economic Development could coordinate small group meetings with council members so that we can get updates on what the business strategy is between now and if and when the special session comes. We would like to have a little bit more information on that as well. So that was just a request.
Okay. We will take that to the administration and see if we can start setting those up.
Great. Thank you, Board Member Wharton. On to item number 5, the Housing Authority term sheet for property located at 346 South, 500 West, adjacent to Station Center.
We're going to have Kara come up and join us, and essentially the discussion points for items 5 and 6 are similar, and so the pleasure of the chair, if you'd like us to have that conversation combined, or if you'd like us to be able to speak to the differences in that, we can. Either way.
Speak to the items combined, and then if there's any specific nuance you might need to address, please jump in there as well.
Okay, I'll set it up at the high level, and then I will defer to Kara and Jill in terms of the details for the specific projects. You may recall that this is essentially a follow-up and an evolution of the conversation and discussion that the board had regarding the Station Center project, as well as other projects that were in consideration for the bonding discussion. As follow-up to that, we presented a memo to the board regarding a strategy for how we could fund the Station Center project. And one of the major components of that funding strategy was the possibility that as part of our negotiations right now with the developers for 2 of the parcels in the Station Center, currently in those agreements, the RDA is obligated to provide the infrastructure improvements. We would sell the parcel to the developer, and then the idea is that the land proceeds would be used in part to build out the infrastructure for Station Center. As far as gathering the funds in order to do the project, we have spoken with the developers, and we are looking at the possibility and negotiating with them the option of having them incorporate the infrastructure improvements and the utility upgrades as part of their developments. And then what we would offer in exchange for that is a write-down of the land price so that that could facilitate them incorporating that work as part of their project. So the 2 developers are a combination of Cowboy Partners and Boyer on one parcel, and then the Housing Authority on another. And what we're requesting today from the board is approval to consider that land sales write-down up to the full sales price of the property for the purpose of doing the infrastructure and utility upgrade improvements for those specific properties as it relates to the Station Center project. And then the agency would essentially pay for the remaining infrastructure upgrades out of our budget funds and future allocations. So having said that, I'm willing to speak to the details of either the projects or the discussion of the numbers as they're related to those write-downs.
So just for clarity, on item 5, we don't yet have an agreement with Housing Authority, but on item 6, we do have an agreement with Boyer Cowboy that we're looking to amend for the infrastructure
Correct.
investment, right?
Right now, on the Boyer Cowboy, we have an option to purchase agreement with them that we're under contract, and so we are working under an extension of that right now. And what this would do is essentially allow us to enter into renewed negotiations for what would be a new agreement, with this term as one of the main components of that. With regard to the Housing Authority, we're right now just under an exclusive negotiating agreement with them, and they are determining of whether this project is one that they want to continue to proceed with. And this is a big piece of how they will consider their development options for the property.
Is that a fair trade-off? I mean, so let me back up. The original agreement with Cowboy Boyer, were we intending to just sell it to them at fair market value?
Yes.
Okay, so now with the land write-down, does that fairly compensate for the estimated cost of infrastructure, or?
Yeah, right now in both of these parcels, the current sales price of the properties is higher than the estimated cost for infrastructure, so we feel that we can cover those costs, and so that's a fair trade-off. And there's still some opportunity there for adjustment as the project is fully designed.
Great. Board members, questions on this?
I do.
Board member Mendenhall?
Thank you. On the, I'm on the Boyer Cowboy property. I'm looking at the 4.75 million in the land sales revenue potential and a 2.4 in the infrastructure costs. And that, I just want to make sure I understand that the 2.4 in the infrastructure cost is just to complete 70% of the design of that infrastructure. And then the remaining 30% is left to the RDA.
It's actually based on 70% design, where we are in that phase of the design. That's what these
I don't know
numbers
what that means.
represent.
So the construction documents are completed to 70%, which means the infrastructure and the utilities are basically designed fully. It's just not a biddable package. Doesn't have all the notes in the drawing sheets and everything that would make it so it could go out to bid, but the design is essentially complete. And so that estimate is for the full construction based on that design.
Well, what's the 70% about?
It's really just a matter of to what level of detail you have taken the construction drawings. And so you have your conceptual, you have your
Which
design.
is a cost allocation.
Yeah, and to what level you can actually estimate costs. And so right now we are at, if you were to think of when you have your drawings and you can actually go out and bid and pull a permit and do construction, that's 100%. We are only at 70% in terms of how refined that design and those numbers are. And part of the reason we're only at that point is because essentially what we would do is we would then hand that to the developers who would now incorporate it as part of their actual construction documents and then work out all of those details and refine the cost further.
So it isn't that we're getting 70% of the project.
No.
It's that we took it to the 70% design level, they pick it up and take it to 100%, and the 2.4 would cover 100% of its development.
That's our estimate right now at the 70% level of design, yes. And so
And
there's a chance that those numbers can change, that they can go up or down. Our hope is that they will go down, that as the developers incorporate them as part of their development, their larger project, there will be economies of scale in terms of a lot of the resources.
But you could
and
come back
materials.
to us on behalf of the developers and say, if we approve this today, you could come back to us and say, it wasn't enough. Do we need to refund them, or, I mean,
What-
and is the difference that we'd be writing down the 4.75 by 2.4-ish?
Yeah, what we're essentially proposing right now is that you're approving a write-down up to the 4.7, the full sales price, but we anticipate only needing 2.7 of that, or whatever the actual cost will be. But we would not necessarily come back and ask the board to fund anything over and above what could be sustained by the purchase price.
But why would we, I understand that bids today and contracts tomorrow have different numbers sometimes, but why would we set ourselves up for double the estimated amount? I understand that we want to give some headway, but I guess I would expect more of a case here if we were going to write off $4.75 million.
It's exactly what you said. It's headway. It's the ability that as the costs change, or if the project changes.
100% headway.
And so if it, at the pleasure of the board, if you wish to restrict that a little bit more, we could certainly do that. I would just ask that we have a little bit of a leeway there in terms of as the costs change, that we don't cut ourselves too tight. But if the board is not comfortable with having that big of a gap and the potential of going up to that, then we can certainly have as part of the motion that you change that a little bit, or that we can come back to the board and get final approval as we know the numbers.
Any follow-up thoughts there?
No.
Okay, Board Member Fowler.
I think you sort of hit on this, Danny, but right at the very end of what you said, we could potentially come back after we have sort of final numbers and approve a write-down at that point.
You could, yes. We could certainly incorporate that in the motion, obviously.
We could like tentatively say, we like this idea of a developer doing the infrastructure so that we can save some costs there, but we're not ready to approve a number until we have a number.
Yeah, you can do it with a few options. You could do it where we come back. You could do it where you set it at a dollar amount, and if it stays at or below that, then you're comfortable with us proceeding. Or you could do it to where, depending on where that, if it goes over that, then we could come back and get approval at that point as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Board Member Mendenhall, then Board Member Johnston, please.
I want to thank the RDA staff for the way that we're doing this now, the conversations that we're having now. And without beating a dead horse, the way we got to this place is not the way we do things now. And I think this is a really good option for us, realizing the circumstances that OPA put us in under a different scenario from previous times. I would like us to reduce the up to amount, and I'm open to your consideration. I mean, we talk about 10%, 15% in the difference between bid and actual contract, and if you want to go up to 25%, 30%, that seems reasonable to me, but 100% is not.
I think we could, we could
And I
accept.
also, I don't want to give an impression, which maybe in years past, even before your time, I have, that I'm opposed to land write-downs. I think, on the contrary, it's a great tool that the RDA uses, but I don't want to set a precedence that we do this.
Sure.
Thanks. I mean, that we do it like this.
Board Member Johnston.
What's the benefit for the leeway? I understand that much leeway or making it simple as far as the total write-down and then coming back to us. Or give me a sense of that.
The first benefit would just be obviously construction costs are increasing. And we know we're only at 70% design level. And so throughout this whole process, we've seen those costs go up and down. So that'd be the biggest reason. The second reason is until we really get into the details of what the specific projects and developments are, there may be changes to even what's in our design. And that allows us the flexibility to adjust the design based on those developments. But I certainly think we can, limit that within reason and give us a little bit of flexibility, but not necessarily have as much leeway as we're showing.
I'm just trying to balance in my head the amount of things we have coming back to the board and the level of detail we need with financial oversight and not wanting to have you keep coming back repeatedly for this.
Yeah, and I think Kara would probably speak to this, but to Board Member Mendenhall's, I think you could look at taking the number that we have now and stating that if it's at or below 125% of that number, then we're okay. Anything over and above that would have to come back to the board or some other percentage or number that you're comfortable with.
Okay.
We would prefer that as well, to have some ability of knowing that the board is comfortable up to this point, but anything over and above that, you would want to see and understand a little bit as to why those costs went up and or what the design is at that point.
Is the writing on the full amount as the language just an easier sort of clean way of going about it at this point versus saying we're going to do a 50% sort of
Say, I didn't hear the first part, I'm sorry.
The language is we'll write down the full amount of the property or up to the full amount of the property versus saying we will write down up to
Yeah.
3 million, whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think you could, the language could essentially be that you would write down up to 100x% of what the 70% cost estimates are that are shown in the memo.
Okay. Second question then is on the housing authority property. There's some remediation issues for soil. Is that accurate? Up to, I want to say 600,000 somewhere in there.
Yeah, Kara, do you want to?
Sure. We had an environmental consultant look at the range of costs for remediating the contamination that's there, and they came up with a low estimate and a high estimate. And a lot of it will depend on what remediation standards the Department of Environmental Quality decides are appropriate for the site. So we took the high estimate as a conservative estimate of how much it could cost to remediate, and included that in what would be written down from the property sale. And in this year's budget, $200,000 were appropriated or allocated for environmental remediation. So what we put in this memo is the remainder. So it would be another $447,000.
Okay. Do we know who's responsible for the contamination we're looking at?
Most of it is just historical use as industrial sites adjacent to the railroad. So
private companies?
not really traceable.
Not
Yeah,
really traceable. That's
no,
why
it's
we have to do it.
widespread. It's widespread contamination in the neighborhood.
That's why we can't pursue other means to get compensated for this?
Right. There is also petroleum hydrocarbon contamination at the site that is from a former bus garage that was there, and that has been covered by the Petroleum Storage Tank Fund at the DEQ. So there is a chance that that fund could be used for some of the remediation, and it's just something that we need to enter into conversations with the DEQ to figure out. And
Okay.
And at this point, we don't know if it will be the RDA entering into those conversations or the future owner of the property.
So if it's a future owner, does the city get any compensation back for our upfront costs on this, or no?
It's a matter of essentially who contracts with DEQ for the cleanup.
Yeah.
And so we wouldn't necessarily get in consideration back. We would probably still offer those funds to go towards the cleanup. It's really just essentially who is responsible for and contracting to perform that remediation.
I'm just trying to see if we're going to front the cost for remediation and someone else will get compensated for it.
Yeah, I mean, we would provide that as the incentive to do it.
Get compensated from the Petroleum Storage Tank Fund, you mean?
Exactly.
Oh, no, we would make sure that whoever's paying, I think that has,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Any additional questions before we look for a motion on this? All right, so does somebody have a motion they'd like to pitch? If not, I have some language I'd like to propose. Okay. Building on what Board Member Mendenhall, you threw out a number of 30%, I believe, is that right, of above construction costs or estimated cost of construction?
I did it in the context of saying I'm open to their feedback.
I think 125%, we'd probably be comfortable with that.
So 25%.
I'll negotiate myself down.
So 25% above the estimated cost of
Yeah.
construction.
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems fair to me to authorize a land write-down for both parcels up to 125% or 25% above estimated construction costs as they're currently laid out in this board memo. Do we have? That was my motion. It wasn't framed very well, but so I move that the board authorizes a land write-down for both parcels up to 125% of estimated construction costs as of today.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I'll make sure on the second property, is that still reasonable?
On the housing authority
Yeah, the housing
piece?
authority property, yeah, because it's a different property, different set of circumstances.
I think it is because that one, we actually don't have as big of a gap as on the Boyer Cowboy piece, and I think that one we're still looking at what that is. Yeah, I think we're reasonable. Are you comfortable with the?
Yes.
And 25% above construction cost seems reasonable for enough headroom based on.
Yeah, and again, it's our understanding that if we go above that, we come back to the board and have that discussion at that point, that's when it kicks it back to another
Great.
discussion. So I think we're good.
Okay, any further discussion on this? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the
We're
support.
going to excuse Jill, and we're going to keep Kara here to talk.
So we are now on to item number 7, feasibility study and development plan for a public market in the Station Center neighborhood. I have Danny Waltz, Kara, and we also have a listed number of folks from the Downtown Alliance, GSBS Architects, and Urban Food Connections of Utah. I don't know if you want to join us or not, but you're welcome to. All right, this is not the first time we've had a public market discussion, so Danny, Kara, I'd toss it to you to begin with if you'd like to at least set it up and remind us what our former, our previous actions were and what we're looking for today.
Give me one
Okay.
second to pull it up. Good?
Sorry? Yeah, sure. Okay, just to give a little bit of the background, the RDA retained GSBS and Market Ventures to conduct a feasibility study for a year-round permanent indoor public market at Site 5 in Station Center. And we came to the board in July of 2017 to present the results of the draft feasibility study. Since then, we have gone back and looked at some of the assumptions and calculations that were in that study, and now we have a final feasibility study that was included in your packets. Jesse Allen is with GSBS, and he's going to talk about the feasibility study. And then we're also joined by Jason Mathis and Allison Enerson, who can come up to the table, or do you want to wait till you're, yeah, you should come up to the table, from Downtown Alliance. And we've been collaborating with Downtown Alliance on the feasibility study and the future public market throughout the process. So I think I can turn it over to Jesse unless there's more background you think I could provide.
That's great, thanks. Hi, Jesse.
Thank you. So today we are following up from the previous time we were here last July. And as everyone is aware, there was a mistake in the report that has been corrected. And today we're going to go through which parts of the report were changed and which parts remain the same. As a quick reminder, the scope of the report addressed three main questions. The first question was that will a year-round permanent public market require ongoing operational subsidy? Number two was, can it fit on Site 5 within Station Center? And number three is, can a mixed-use development provide a direct financial benefit to the public market? And the mistake that was made in the previous report was regarding question 3. And so there was a mistake in the financial pro forma that indicated that a mixed-use development could provide a significant benefit to the cost of construction of the public market. In reality, the majority of the cost of construction of the public market will have to be provided through public grants or private donations. So the revised report shows that a mixed-use development does not provide a direct financial benefit, but there are secondary benefits of having a mixed-use development associated with the public market. Primarily, the benefit being that if you combine a mixed-use development on top of the public market, it allows for residential to be located on 500 West, which is part of the code and design guidelines for that area. It also allows you to meet the height requirement of a development in that area. So the report has been changed to reflect that correction. Another change in the revised report is this overall size of the public market. Based on the information I previously described, we have tried to minimize the size of the market in order to bring the overall cost down. Previously, the size of the market was based on the extending the market out to the property lines of the site, which is a requirement of the design guidelines, but we've pulled that back in order to minimize the overall size and bring the cost down. The overall size was decreased by removing the 3-day portion of the public market where it would just be open 3 days a week instead of the full 7 days a week like the rest of the market. It also removed the office component that was going to be rented by a partnership organization. So with a smaller market size overall, the amount of parking needed also decreased proportionally, which brought down the cost. Although through the study we realized that underground parking is extremely expensive, and so the revised report recommends that a shared model of parking be provided for the market. We're still providing one level of underground parking for the market instead of the previous 2 levels. So those are the significant changes. The remainder of the report remained primarily the same, where the other two questions that were addressed is that the data shows that a public market will not require ongoing operational subsidy. In fact, it should be able to have an operating profit within 2 years. And then the second major question that the report was asking is, can it fit on Site 5? And the answer is yes, it can, with minor modifications to the design guidelines, specifically the property line thing that was brought up earlier. So why is Site 5 recommended in the report?
So just to clarify, in talking about the design guidelines, it sounds like that would require a zoning or land use change on our part, right? Is that what you're referring to? Is it?
No.
You can answer if you.
Well, I believe that there's the design guidelines and then there's the zoning requirements for the area, and I think that those are separate.
Okay. But it will require a change in land use, right?
The zoning requirement, I believe, is for residential to be constructed on Fifth West. So that is that your understanding, Jennifer? Okay. And that is in upper levels, right? Yeah. So ground floor could be retail, it could be public market. And the change from the zoning, I believe, would be if office were put on top of the market.
I see.
If residential were on top of the market, it wouldn't be a change.
And I think the other thing that would have to be checked is the setback requirement, because I actually think that is in the zoning. So that would have to be, that if the setback was changed, that would be a zoning, either a text amendment or a rezoning for that property.
Thank you, Jennifer Bruno from the council office. Cindy Gus Jensen.
Well, typically, we've had a lot of discussion in the past about whether the role of RDA is to follow the city codes and implement the master plan, or whether it's to be in a different place. And it sounds like this is in a slightly different place, although not in a material way. So, but it's worth noting that this doesn't comply with the city's current codes.
Yeah. Okay. For the record. Proceed. Thank you.
There are other ways that the code could be met by providing additional programming on that first level in order to bring the building out to the property line, but that wasn't part of this study. We were trying to bring the cost down of the market, and so we were pulling back the overall size. And then the last thing I'll say is the overall goals of the public market that inform the planning, development, and operation remain the same in the revised report. And those are to provide a catalyst for development of the Station Center area, to expand the impacts and benefit of the farmers market, to create a hub for Utah's local foods movement, to support small business entrepreneurship and create jobs. And the last is to promote community wellness through food access and education. The revised report shows that through the right management and operation of the public market, all these goals can be accomplished. The report identifies Urban Food Connection of Utah as the most qualified management group based on their proven track record of the farmers market and the winters market. And Allison is going to explain how the Urban Food Connection of Utah is able to accomplish these goals.
I won't go too heavily into how we'll accomplish all of those goals because there are a lot of things that we don't know yet. What we do know is that for 27 years we've operated one of the largest and most successful farmers markets in the West. We know that we have helped to create more than 24 businesses, go from a small booth to brick and mortar business, go from small booth to national and international distribution. We know that we have the tools to identify the right vendors. We know how to cultivate a product mix that's been very successful. For 5 years now, we've operated the winter market in the Rio Grande Depot. That has been a great partnership with the state, where we activate that building and also continue to provide economic return for vendors all year long instead of just in the summer months. This year, for the first time, we are every week at the Rio Grande. It has been very successful. The turnout has been great. The reception has been great. We have a proven track record of getting people to a neighborhood that maybe they're unsure of, and we have a proven track record of giving people the confidence that the markets we create are really, really special. And so we know that a public market is really just an extension of our ability to do that, with a lot more amenities like a demonstration kitchen and event spaces and educational kitchens, where we can engage more children in our programming, and a beautiful vendor mix on the main floor that allows us to just continue to incubate business and create jobs.
Any questions at this point, board members? I have a question about item number 3, about the feasibility of a private developer constructing a public market. Have you begun to engage any private developers, any folks that might be interested in a partnership with Urban Food Connections? How can you break this out for me a little bit more and help me understand what it might look like if this were to be the direction that we went?
Well, Derek, it's funny you should ask that question. In fact, we have had some good conversations with Cowboy Partners and Boyer, who are looking at the parcel just to the west.
Quickly, sorry, I just want, will you introduce yourself
I
to
will.
them?
Jason
Thank you.
Mathis. I'm the executive director of the Downtown Alliance. I think as Jesse indicated, we didn't see a direct benefit to the market for having office space or residential on top. But the office space or residential adjacent to the market sees a real benefit of having the market in that neighborhood. And so over the last 2 months, these 2 private developers have approached us and said that they would like to help us find ways to make this project a reality, that they feel that there's a solid business case for moving forward in this neighborhood with this project. And that, in fact, it would help to have their expertise. I think Allison did a great job laying out our expertise in operations. We know how to run a market. We know who the vendors are. We know who the consumers are. We have a great relationship with thousands and thousands of people, but we've never built a public market before. That's just something we don't know necessarily how to do. We feel like the report that Jesse went through and that we've spent a lot of time on sets a foundation for how this might happen. More important even than this report, though, is the expertise that private developers would bring to this project, because they actually do know how to create a development. They do know how to build retail space and integrate it with retail and office space. We don't have their final proposal at this time, but we do, I think, have a really strong partnership with them to make this a reality, and I feel a lot more confident moving forward knowing we have their expertise as part of the project.
So a partnership with a private developer, it would not change the cost of construction for you all. It would still stay at 31 million is what I think I saw in the report.
Yeah, that's what the report is anticipating, and I think we're comfortable it won't be more than that. They have made some suggestions about value engineering that could actually bring the cost down, but I don't think we're prepared at this point to say what that would look like. I think we'd like to hear more from Boyer and Cowboy about what that might look like. I feel like the number that came as part of this feasibility study anticipates every conceivable cost and is a fairly high number. It's my hope that we can bring that down significantly as we start to work with local developers who have more experience in this market and aren't using necessarily national numbers to put that together.
So I'm going to keep asking questions unless board members have something to. Okay. I believe a previous iteration of this board authorized Site 5, and so I don't know exactly what that action was. Maybe staff can help us, but if, for instance, you decided to move forward with the partnership with a private developer, we're looking at a different site, right? That's 580 West 300 South. Is that correct? No?
No, I think we're still looking at Site 5.
Yeah.
Okay, so Boyer would move forward with their project. We're not talking, they would have two projects in the neighborhood is what we're suggesting? Okay. My confusion, I apologize.
And I was going to say, I think what you're talking about is Site 5, but with the opportunity to either combine the projects and build them out together and or look at opportunities like shared parking that could be shared between the residential, the office component, and the market. And I'm not sure we have any of those details yet, other than the Downtown Alliance has at this point just reached out and looked at whether that's an opportunity or a conversation that's worth continuing with Cowboy Partners and Boyer.
Excuse me. Thank you for that clarity. Board members, anything at all? Board member Mendenhall.
Yeah, thanks for coming back to us with some clarity on our questions from before. I keep coming back to what is page, I think the report isn't actually, the pages aren't numbered. So in my packet, it's page 19 of 369. But it's the chart that summarizes income and expense scenario for the market. And it's really that capital that's our biggest hurdle, right? And so it's encouraging to hear that you're having conversations with these private developers. But I kept noticing the public and philanthropic opportunity, and clearly we already have a dialogue going on here. So I think it will come down to, let me say first though that I am supportive of this market in this location. I think that Allison, you're absolutely right that the market is a way to bring people into a neighborhood that they would otherwise not go into because there wasn't a draw, or they may be intimidated by going into, and the market creates a community experience that would be valuable in the station center. As an aside, I loved hearing that we should rebrand the station center area because I never liked the name of it anyway. So rebranding it as the Salt Lake City Market District sounds great to me. But I guess my encouragement and my sentiment at this point is to continue or to ask you to continue exploring the philanthropic side and the private partnership side of this. As we look, we're having sales tax option discussions right now, general obligation bond discussions this year around literally hundreds of millions of dollars of really foundational needs in our city that we don't have the money for, that it becomes difficult for us to look at participating with tens of millions of dollars potentially in a public market, even though we all maybe like the idea. So help us get there with other partnerships that bring it along.
Yeah, I would say that I think it's our hope over the next few months to come back with really what is the gap. If we do partner with Boyer and Cowboy, if they do incorporate some other elements of the sort of holistic neighborhood development into this market, if we do some shared parking, there are lots of ways that we think we can bring the cost down. And I also think that we can have a really pretty solid understanding of what we might hope to expect for philanthropy. The same sentiment that you express about the public market is shared by lots of other people. And I look at the city's success in raising funds for the Eccles Theater, where I think we raised $10 million more than the actual goal, which was good because it cost $10 million more than the actual goal. But I feel confident that this project will have some emotional resonance with people who will be willing to help support it on a philanthropic basis. And I want to commit here now, we won't be looking to the RDA as the only entity, or the city as the only entity to help us make this project successful. We need to find lots and lots of people who can do that. I think that's the value of a public market, that it appeals across many cross sections and many industries and many interests. So that's our commitment to you as these numbers start to solidify and we start to get an even better understanding of what it looks like with the private sector partners.
I appreciate that, and I believe that there is a lot to be gained from that holistic development vision, and a lot of us have explored recently developed parts of Denver and looked at the the contrast when you issue an entire area to a single developer, and there's costs and benefits to be sure, but there I think are some great benefits to be gained with this particular consideration in the context of office, retail, residential development, all under the same think tank, so to speak, of development. So keep working that angle and come back to us as it progresses.
Board Member Johnston.
Yeah, thank you for coming back with this, and I'll be anxious to wait and see what you come up with for the overhead funding. I continue to be concerned by talking about this in the context of West Side Food Desert. I'm concerned that push comes to shove, you have to be able to make it pencil, right? And right now, I haven't seen a public market that is really truly open to low-income residents for a variety of reasons. If that's one of the fundamental tenets, number 5 on here, I'd really want to hear back specifically exactly how that happens, versus just saying there's a food desert, this is closer to it, and we can potentially use SNAP or double bucks. That doesn't translate to actually action of folks using it, so I'd like to hear more of that if we're going to continue to talk about it in that context.
I'll just briefly say that we do work with a lot of community partners like Utahns Against Hunger and Community Workforce Services to make sure that we are as open and as welcoming to all populations as we can be, hence the SNAP program and the Double Up Food Bucks program that we're currently working on refunding with the Department of Health. It is a major focus in order to make this a truly welcoming public space.
Anything further, board members? Okay, so we are not asked to take any formal action on this tonight, but it looks like next steps include coming to the board next month. Is that what I understand from this report?
That's what we listed as the next steps. I don't necessarily anticipate that being in a position to come back next month as much as working with the Downtown Alliance and giving them the opportunity to explore their possibility. And at that point, if there's a conversation to be had, we will come back as part of a discussion on what would ultimately be a disposition of Site 5. But really, I think it would just be a discussion of what the options are. And as Jason indicated, trying to see if they can identify how to fill those gaps.
Okay. I want to be cognizant of our time. We have an agenda work session for the City Council at 4 o'clock. But given that we've finalized at least this item, I think that there is one unanswered question here with regard to the public market, and that is action that the board took a couple months ago, maybe a year ago, on the Fair Park, and we allocated some resources for a potential feasibility study at the Fair Park, and I feel like that is kind of a lingering question that needs we need to get some clarity on what we intend there and what, if we, are we moving forward in that direction? Because, we have a potential partner in Urban Food Connections of Utah, and I don't know if, we decide to move in a different direction as far as site goes, what that does to the report that we just read.
Well, Danny, before you say that, I mean, I know that we've all voted on this before, but even though the report might have changes, I mean, we all knew what was going to come back and say. I mean, we knew it was going to say, oh, this is the perfect spot for it. This is the perfect place to have it. I mean, this is the whole problem with this whole scenario is I feel like it's made as instructed, made as it was supposed to be intended for. That's why I think we need to have something to have comparison. I think that we're saying, yeah, that's the problem is that we have people who say, oh, I'm afraid to change this contract out the airport for janitorial. Who's going to do it? What if? These are what if case scenarios. We need to move forward, see if there are other stakeholders that are just as interested in moving forward. This could be the spot. The fairgrounds really could be the spot for it. But until we have a comparison, we can't make that decision.
Board Member Fowler, I think you have a follow-up.
I do, and I obviously was not here for any vote regarding the money and feasibility of having the public market out at the fairgrounds. I do support the public market being here at Site 5, but I understand Council Member or Board Member Rogers' concern. I'm wondering, however, if there's a way to, as we look at that feasibility study, look at the Fair Park as sort of a more broad feasibility study, if you will, and can say, what would be really good there? Maybe incorporate would the farmer's market work there as a component of that feasibility study, but then broaden that feasibility study to say, are there other things that would better fit this community? So I think in that way, we certainly hope to address Board Member Rogers' concerns, but then maybe there's a better idea besides the farmer's market there, right? And maybe if that feasibility study is broadened, we're looking at what really can reactivate that space and be a good use of space for the fair park. So, I mean, as we consider this, it is a lingering question, and I would ask, you know, as we consider that feasibility study and as we're kind of framing the issue around it, is to kind of make it a little bit broader, so we're actually looking, if not the market, maybe it doesn't work, but it's certainly addressing, hopefully, Board Member Rogers' concerns, what would really work out there.
And I understand all that. I am just extremely frustrated because I've been asking for probably 2 years to have this study done. 2 years, and here we are. We still haven't done it.
Board Member Mendenhall, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I think that for the most part, I agree with Board Member Fowler. And I also agree that we allocated this money and we'd like something to happen on it. This is an example of when we come up with, whether it's a board or a council, we come up with funding for something that we didn't coordinate and create momentum on the staff end for, and it sits there. Not to blame, but sometimes we come up with stuff and then we go, okay, you're gonna do it, right? And all the rest of life and your workflow happens, and without momentum, it doesn't happen. So I think you're right, and I understand that, I think Board Member Rogers knows more about this, but that there's other types of markets in other parts of the country that maybe would work well with our state partners in bringing in broader regional, I don't want to say just farms, but I look at what happens out there at the State Fair Park on special event bases, and that there's a different, there are different kind of experiences happening at the farmers market than there are in a downtown. I mean, at the, well, yes, from the farmers market to the State Fair Park area, there's really different uses based on a whole bunch of different factors, to be sure. But maybe there's space for two very different types of markets at two times.
Board Member Mendenhall, I understand and I appreciate it, and I appreciate everyone's concerns. The issue that I'm having time and time again is coming back to, I've been at this for 2 years trying to get a feasibility study on this. And I'm not going to badmouth the Downtown Alliance, but they have a lot of pressure. They have a lot of pull with the city. And I feel like there has been that pressure, there's been that pull, so that there has not been any direction, any push in trying to push this forward. And here I am, and I'm calling them out because this is wrong. I'm sorry. I've been at this for 2 years trying to get this done, and I feel like it hasn't been pushed forward because there have been certain individuals trying to prevent this from going forward because they have their own personal interest in trying to see it go here. All I'm saying is let's look at it. Let's have some good data and analysis to look at, and not something that was made as instructed. It's that simple. I mean, here we are, and here we are. I'm telling you, it's probably going to be the same thing unless somebody else calls it out and says, let's move forward with this, because we cannot actually say, yeah, let's go forward with this proposal until we have something else. I mean, here I am blue in the face. I feel like when I bring something up, I don't push it. And I think that you guys should see that when I say something, it's because, hey, this has actual value to it. But this is ridiculous. I'm sorry, Danny. I know that you came in recently, but this, I'm pissed. I am really pissed off.
I understand.
Well, Councilmember Rogers, I agree, but the question back to the chair is where's the money and what's not happened and why?
Yeah,
The money is allocated in agency accounts, and the best answer I can probably give is I think we were waiting for the conclusion of this before we looked at the Fair Park, and I apologize to Board Member Rogers that I can't answer beyond my knowledge on that, but I think if it is to please the board, that we can certainly allocate those funds and put that project together and put it out, and whether the board wanted to run that as a parallel path as we allow the Downtown Alliance to look at this side, I think that's entirely possible. I think it's within the purview of the board to not make any decisions on this until we have that study, and I think it's really just a matter of what the direction and comfort level that you as a board want to provide direction to staff.
Okay, I would like to find some direction today on this, if possible. Yes, Board Member Mendenhall.
I feel like I can give some clarity to my opinion that I don't want to hold up this process of the Station Center area public market, for which I don't blame the Downtown Alliance for not being interested in the Fair Park market. It's not in the downtown. It's not in your purview at all. So it really is an in-house allocation. And I'm not trying to point fingers, but I'm trying to say that I want to separate these two and let them continue to try to find philanthropic and private partnerships to see if they can get the capital conversation moving on our end. We're not there yet, but I feel like you're moving in a good direction. And we have existing private partners coming to fruition in that area who may want to play ball, and it would be foolish of us for us to say stop at this point. And I would, having voted on the prevailing side of the allocation of that money a year ago or 2 years ago, whatever it is, I guess I'd like some clarification about whether or not we instructed the staff to conduct or contract a feasibility study instead of this location, or whether it was to look at all viable market possibilities for the State Fair Park location, which is what I would like to support, not in contrast.
If I may jump in really quick, I'm really sympathetic to Board Member Rogers. I think, we've experienced this with the mural project in the granary. I think that Aaron made it really clear that sometimes when we take an action and we don't get buy-in from the other side, it prevents it from being successful as soon as we'd like it to be. And so I think that was maybe something that we could have coordinated behind the scenes and in advance of our vote last time. However, I think that I also voted for this allocation of $175,000, I believe, for a study at the Fair Park. I think it serves an important purpose, and I want to keep it there. However, I don't want it to be limited to a public market feasibility study. I don't think that makes very much sense. I would like for us to look at the fairgrounds and how we can activate the fairgrounds, how we can make an investment in the fairgrounds that will help us achieve our goals on North Temple, how we can maybe pull in partners like the state, and how we can maybe look at economic development opportunities along the corridor and at the fairgrounds. I know that we just made an investment in the stadium for the Days of 47, as well as I've heard through the grapevine that there are some state economic development actors that are looking at the fairground for a potential investment. And so I would hate for us to invest $175,000 in a singular study when we could identify maybe our goals for the fairgrounds and then get that off the ground as soon as possible. So I don't know how the board feels about broadening the scope to, economic development, achieving our RDA goals and activating the fairgrounds, which should include the market as well. But doesn't it seem like we should broaden it a little bit?
Mr. Chair, how much did this study cost for this public market analysis?
I think
No, the one we just did?
One we just did.
The 175,000 allocation, is my understanding, was set at the same amount as this study. So I could verify that, but that's my knowledge.
So if it cost us that much money to do this particular narrow study, does it make any sense whatsoever to expand it with the same amount of money?
I think you could get a decent scope of services for 175,000.
So to clarify, sorry, I jumped in. To clarify there, you think that if we were to broaden the scope, that we would still be able to get an understanding of what would best fit out at the Fair Park for the 175? We don't need to allocate more money to that.
I wouldn't think so. I think what you may not include in the scope of services is you may not be as heavy on some of the demographic data if you're not specifically looking at the operations and funding a public market and whether one would be successful. But if you were looking at a broader base in terms of what the scope of a project would be for activating the fairgrounds, I mean, you'd be looking at a different kind of level of urban planning and site usage rather than just how could you make a public market work and how to operate one.
So Danny, if we identified a scope for the study today, how soon could you get that off the ground?
We could probably have it out in the market in 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay. James, how do you feel about an expanded scope rather than narrowing it just to the market?
I think it's great. I mean, let's just get something moving so that we can actually analyze what we can do. I mean, without that, we're seriously doing this, and I think that's, and I'm sorry, I feel like that's the ploy, is that let's just go around in circles till everyone gets sick and tired of it. And we can say, well, let's just move on.
Okay. Board Member Luke.
So question for Danny. So it'll take you 2 or 3 weeks to get the scope out. How long do you think it's going to take for the survey to be awarded and completed and back to staff and us? For
2 or 3 weeks to get an
analysis?
RFP out, then you would probably have a week or two to consider the proposals awarded, and then maybe another 2 to 3 weeks after that to kind of get the first meetings going and get them engaged and starting to hold stakeholder meetings or whatever those initial steps.
Between, say, today and having the final product that we can all discuss, what would you, just a guesstimate?
6 months.
Okay. I do think that I like the idea of a broader scope to look at this, because I do think that the Fair Park has an incredible amount to offer. I do think that the area itself is ripe for attention. To Andrew's point about the food desert, that is real, and I think that there are limited opportunities there for residents near the Fair Park, and so I'm supportive of broadening the scope. But at the same time, I'm still interested in seeing what the analysis is of the potential of having a market at the Fair Park, and having something to really compare it against to what we're seeing here. So while I'm supportive of broadening it, and I also wish that we had something sooner, but we don't. So what I'm not interested, though, in doing is getting too far down the path on the other location without having the actual information on what the market's going to do. If the survey comes back and Station Center is clearly the best location, and we have something to balance it with, great. Then we can move forward. I'll move forward with my support. I don't feel that we have that information. I would hate to get too far down the line and on Station Center, and then come back and say, oh wait, this could have been much, much different. So I encourage us to move forward with the broader scope, but I'm not interested in moving forward on anything until we have that survey back. And it would have been nice to have had it done sooner.
Board Member Fowler.
There's nothing to say that there can't be 2 of these, right? There's nothing to say that there can't be a farmer's market that starts out at the Fair Park. I think right now, luckily, we're not being asked to do anything on this, but I would echo Board Member Mendenhall's sentiment that I would hate to stall some of the negotiations going on with private partnerships to really re-engage and reactivate that area behind the Rio Grande that we all have concerns about, that has just kind of started to be a little bit more active, that to stall that at all, when right now all we're asked to do is look at this, right? I mean, right now, luckily, we don't have a decision to be made. But I again, really don't think that we should discount what is being proposed here, because I don't think that we are thwarted by saying, let's do another farmer's market out there. If the feasibility study comes back and says, yeah, a public market that looks a little different would go well out there. Okay, well, let's have 2. They're very different areas, very different needs, and and it could really address the food desert. I mean, it's a different community with different needs than what we have right downtown. And so I think that having an informed decision, of course, is what I like to do best, But I also think that we shouldn't be thwarting the efforts of what's happening right now, particularly when there are already negotiations or when there are already some private entities that are willing to like jump on board and help fund this. I just think that's so important that we allow them to continue going forward with this and talking to those private partnerships and making those connections, because I can only think in Spanish right now, but sea como sea, we need to activate that area. And now we have people that want to activate that area with this proposal. It just seems to make sense to at least allow them to continue moving forward with the conversations and get, obviously, the feasibility study to see how we can also activate the fair park.
Board Member Johnston, please.
I want to be clear, though. The point's not to hold anything, hold anything up. The point was we asked for this same study a year ago, and it hasn't happened yet. So to say we're not going to hold it up now because of this, it misses the whole point that we asked for the same thing a while back, and we're down a path now. They're saying, well, we're already down the path. Let's keep going down the path without this. And I want to make sure we learn from what happened. I don't know why the study wasn't done. I don't know sort of the workload issues and everything else and the chaos of the last few months especially. But I want to be clear that holding this up is not the point. The point for me was we're trying to come back a year later, if not more, and figure out, well, I have no idea how you do two public markets that close together. I can ask you right now, is that feasible?
I think if the markets were very different, it could be, but I do think you wouldn't want to have two identical markets together. I also just want to mention, because of the affection and respect I have for James, I promise, James, we have never tried to slow anything down. I wish we had that much power and sway, but I promise Downtown Alliance has not tried to slow anything down with the Fair Park. If anything, we'd be happy if the study was done so that you'd have a more fair frame of reference at this moment. But I just want to publicly tell you, I'll tell it to you privately as well, but I'll just tell you publicly, we have not in any way ever tried to slow down the Fair Park study or conversation.
I would like to jump in really quick and maybe get some clarity on this. So if I may I know you have a question, I think, Board Member Mendenhall, but I'd like for us to get some direction on all of this. So I'm gonna request at least 2 straw polls, and I'd be receptive to others if people have ideas. So please, toss it out and let's entertain what everybody has on their mind. But I want to get some clarity first on the study for the Fair Park. And so my question to this body is, do we support collectively broadening the scope beyond just a market, but activating the Fair Park, fairgrounds, and figuring out how we can best make an investment along North Temple in line with our RDA project area goals? So that's my question for a straw poll, and I have a question from Board Member Johnston.
Yeah, can we have a discussion about that at all?
Sure.
We've studied North Temple quite a bit. Is that accurate?
Well, there's the North Temple Boulevard plan, so there's the master plan. I believe the state had a master plan done for the Fair Park, and then a follow-up plan for the Fair Park. And we have our North Temple project area plan.
We have a lot of research being done over there. No action's happening. It's the problem for us in one section of 10th to 7th West, essentially. Having another study, like, I won't speak for James, but look, I'm not going to turn down help over there. However, I don't want to throw more money at something that we need projects. We need something done, right? And if this money allocated will get there, okay. But the point of it was to give a balance to say a public market, where's the best place? And if we're going to move forward without that comp, then let's be clear about that. We're going to move forward without that comp and use this for something else. But I want to be clear we're doing that.
Well, I mean, if you really want to get to the root of that question, then we need to be looking citywide. Where would a public market fit best? Not just between one project area and a second project area, because then we're pitting 2 project areas against each other. So I'm more interested in entertaining James' idea about getting something done in the Fair Park so that we can start seeing some movement over there. And so I'm just trying to build on that a little bit. So that was the intent of my straw poll here.
So I would be comfortable with that, but if we used it or phrased the just raise it for the consultant to discuss that which location would be a better location. And if it turns out that the Fair Park is not a better location, what would be a good thing to go into that spot? I'm fine with that. I mean, I think that's what we were looking for from all the beginning. But for us to say which one is better, well, let's find out for sure which one is better.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
I think that's a more complicated question than it sounds like, because to Mr. Mathis's point, what kind of market really influences this whole feasibility study is built on page II of the executive summary, the demographic profiles of four different types of residents and vendor or visitors to the market, and that would be different for the Fair Park one. The type of market that is created based on who would be shopping there would probably be different. So I think it's pretty complicated. What kind of market are you talking about? Are you talking about a more ethnically compatible market,
Erin,
or a visitor
Come on.
intermodal hub market?
This is crazy. Why are we diving? I mean, North Temple has tracks. North Temple has parking. North Temple has the state and the county right there with them. I mean, yeah, they're different, but come on, let's do the same feasibility study to compare it and say, hey, which one is better? I mean, we're diving into the weeds here. All we wanted was a feasibility study to say, would this be a good place for a public market? If that doesn't work, what would they suggest? It's not that difficult. I'm sorry, it's not.
Well, I disagree that at this point, we have this feasibility study. It's done. Your work is done, Jesse. Thank you very much. Now it's Downtown Alliance's job to pick up this feasibility study and the capital requirements of it and run the ball and come back to us when you feel like you've gotten somewhere that we would want to play ball. And I think we seem in very clear agreement that we're not there yet. But the North Temple, I just think we've come into a place where James is upset, and this is becoming the crux where we can, or the lever that James can use to get at studying this State Fair Park area that we've asked you to do a long time ago, and for whatever lack of clarity, it hasn't happened. So I'm going to propose a straw poll. I know you did, but I think it was I guess my comment on your straw poll is that I think it's really broad. And I do want us to, there's a very specific partnership that exists there, and there's a specific authority that we have, is my understanding, that it's not just Salt Lake City that owns the Fair Park and operates it.
It is the state of Utah.
And so I want to be as specific as we can in our feasibility request so that it's as usable as possible. Now, whether I agree that it may not be a market that's best there, but I think that to include all of North Temple and the activation of the community is around the whole North Temple district is too broad. So maybe we could refine it some more.
I have a couple notes here on what I was intending, so let me just read them and we can see if we can find a collective straw poll to move forward. Okay, I think we need to figure out how to best activate the fairgrounds, make an investment there. I think we should solicit potential partners in the state and the county, and we need to evaluate the market idea in addition to anything else that might work well. So I want it to include the market, but I want it to also I want the consultant or whoever we hire with this money to be able to look at alternative uses that could serve the fairground well. So that's my intent here.
Can I ask for friendly inclusion in there? That whatever the study that it be, which I'm sure it would be anyway, but that we be inclusive of the existing master plans of the area and the intergovernmental relationships, or however we need to phrase it.
Yeah.
So that the state recognizes that we are being inclusive of their work in the area and our shared partnership.
Well, they own the fairgrounds, so we don't want to step on any toes either, right?
I just want the language to be there.
Okay. Can we vote on that? Is that clear enough for everybody? It is not? Sure.
Can you restate it
So,
again?
so my proposal here is that we move forward with with a feasibility study for the fairgrounds with the money that we've already allocated or set aside to identify how to best activate the fairgrounds, to identify the partners that we would need in order for this to be successful. Obviously, the state and the county are two that come to mind. And we want to include the idea of a market of some sort, as well as other components to activate the fairgrounds. And include master plans and existing documents that may already be out there. So is that clear enough for y'all? Okay, can we do? Oh man. All right, so how do you feel about that?
You know, it is what it is. It's failed already, in my opinion. We've already failed.
Well, I'm trying to get it off the ground here, so.
It is what it is. Let's vote on it.
All right, so thumbs up if you support my straw poll. Okay, so I have 5 in favor, 2 against, Charlie and Andrew opposing that. But we have some clarity, so we will expect something from the RDA staff in the next couple weeks with some direction.
And get to work on it.
Okay, so that feels good to have that out of the way. Do we need anything else? Do we need some clarity on the public market in Station Center? Do we want to give the...
I think we'd just like to work on this. The interest from the private developers is fairly recent. It's happened in the last 6 weeks. We'd like to put some numbers together with them and come back to you with a more detailed proposal that hopefully makes sense and limits the city's liability. That really is one of our top goals in this project.
Great. Board members, would you like to add anything else before we close out this item? Okay, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. We have just a few minutes left. I'd like to finish this agenda out. We have reports and announcement from the executive director. Do you have anything from the administrative side? No? Okay. Staff.
The only item I have, I think, is a follow-up to one of the items listed in an email from council staff regarding the RDA's notice of funding availability for the $10 million in housing funds. That's something we are actively working on. We plan on taking that to the Redevelopment Advisory Committee in April and then bring it to this board as an update, either as a written briefing in April or in May as a briefing with further information. So just wanted to update the board and let you know that we are working on that and hope to get that out as soon as possible.
Fabulous. We will wait in anticipation for that. I have nothing to add as far as a report from the chair.
May I ask how hiring's going, your staffing situation?
We are deep in interviews, and in fact, I'm afraid I may actually lose some staff because of how many interviews we're asking them to participate in. But we are essentially wrapping up the interviews, the second round of interviews with our project managers, and hope to have some candidates that we are extending offers to. We are in the middle of doing the interviews for the deputy director. The jobs for the accounting position and the admin secretary have closed, and we are in the process of starting those interviews. So we hope to get staff soon and get everyone working and start training new members of the staff.
Godspeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danny Waltz, for that. I have no updates unless, Amy, do you have anything you'd like to bring to the board?
Do I? Yet? No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Moving on, we are at item D, written briefings. I have one question. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to ask about the written briefing? Okay. So I was looking at the timeline for this mural program. I really like it, so thank you for putting in the work, staff. But my question is on the timeline. It's pretty ambitious to have submissions by April or May 17th. That's just under 2 months. So how do you plan to promote this, and how do you plan to spend the money? Make sure that we spend the money.
I think it would be a combined promotion through the RDA, Business Development, and Main Street America. And I think depending on how that initial promotion and response went, then we could also potentially look at just having it open on an ongoing basis.
Okay.
But I think you wanted to, at least the initial offering, you wanted to have a deadline for people to respond to and have proposals. And then depending on that level, you could determine if you want to keep it open and going until the funds are fully expended.
Okay. That sounds good to me. Okay, now we are at the consent agenda. This is where we talk about the Stadler Rail single property CRA. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate my earlier comments that I would hope that, I would ask that the board just approve the consent agenda, set the date and time, allow us the opportunity to reach out to Stadler and maybe get some information from them in terms of where they're truly at with their purchase agreement and to what extent the creation or non-creation of an RDA project area affects them moving forward. And we could report back to you on that in April, and then at that point you could decide to take action and or put it on hold then.
Yeah, and if you could also find out if the purchase option itself is contingent on the boundary creation, or if they need tax increment as well for that.
We can do that, yes.
Just because I think there was maybe some miscommunication in our meeting yesterday and what we're seeing today, so some clarity would be great there. Board members, do you have any opposition to setting this date? Okay. All right, I'll look for a motion on the consent agenda.
Move approval.
A motion by Board Member Mendenhall, second by Board Member Fowler. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that carries, and we are set. Thank you so much for joining us
Very
today,
much.
and we will see you next month. Oh, excuse me.
Are we
Board-
done, are we done, you mean, or?
We're done.
Can I ask that we take a break
Yes.
before we start our council work session, and that we come back here at, I'd like to really actually start at 4:15,
All right.
and then we can work through a pretty,
All right, we're going to break for 15 minutes, and our council work session will begin at 4:15 sharp. Thank you.